Hello, and welcome to the Heathen's Journey podcast. I'm your host, Siri Vincent Plough, and I'm so glad you're here. This is the show where I explore heathenry through a queer lens. We will be talking about traditional witchcraft, runes, folklore, and so much more. Join us, won't you, as we journey to the ends of the 9 realms and back. Hello, and thank you for joining me. This October has been busy in the best of ways and spooky in the most fun ways. I've been enjoying settling myself into autumn. Still working on the book, just quietly behind the scenes. Slowing down has been really important to me lately. I've talked about this before, but I'm still thinking about it a lot. I've been stepping back from Instagram and want to continue to maintain a connection with folks who found me there. I've actually really been enjoying Threads, which is the Instagram, Twitter, dupe app, for lack of a better word. I had preferred Blue Sky for a while, but it's still in beta and there just aren't very many people on Blue Sky, and Threads is right there. So I'm really enjoying Threads. It feels effortless. So if you're on there, come say hi. You might even be my 666th follower. That is so delightful. All right, so I'm not feeling particularly chatty at the moment, so that's it. That's the ramble. Cutting it. Here we go. It's time for me to introduce this week's guest. This week's episode is a conversation with my mentor, Kari Tauring. Growing up in a Norwegian-American family, she began studying ancient runes, poetry, archaeology, and art in 1989. This deep dive took her into a lifelong passion as a full-time career as a touring performer, author, and educator. She is the author of the Volva Stav Manual, The Runes, A Deeper Journey, and today we're discussing her newest book, The Day Begins at Sunset. This is a collection of poems reflecting on the Primstav, which is an Old Norse calendar stick that helped people follow the seasons and the saint days in the Middle Ages. I spoke about this with Sara Axtell as well in episode 19. In that episode, we focused on the concept of unsettling ourselves, on how we as settler colonizers can actively participate in decolonization while appreciating the land around us. This episode is a little different. Kari and I talk a lot more about the challenges of living through uprising, unprecedented times, and how our ancestors can support us. Kari is going to read a bit from some of her poetry, and it's all around a good time. I will give a quick content warning at the beginning of this episode. We do discuss the realities of living really close to George Floyd Square during the uprisings. And we also, talk about religious trauma and a lot of heavier topics. We talk about oppression. We talk about, brutal conversion from paganism to Christianity historically and how that reflects today now in our practices. And so if you are not in the headspace to engage with that, I will completely understand if you want to listen to this episode at a later date or just return to it at a different time. I just wanted to give you that heads up. I think that this conversation is very juicy and well worth your listen. All right, let's get into it.
The day begins at sunset. It says so in Genesis. Grimm brothers, too. And it was evening and it was morning, day one. Night is the mother of day, so day starts with night. Our day is Dag, giant divine. Dag as rune, preserved for all time. Hail day and day's sons. Emerge from your mother, great mother night. Noth. Hail night and mysterious nip. It's nature's logic. Children come after the mother. Darkness begets the light. Not the night rider rides the night mare across the sky, mother of darkness and of day. Then follows Mani, sometimes. Moon god, brother of the sun, Suna, loves his sister, so collects her light, loads it in a cart, hauls it here and there to give us silver, sometimes. Mani meanders, and Suna shines. Hail, Suna, come again. Soul Saul Saulo, rune preserved for all time. Break through the clouds, rise above the rooftop, cure us from illness, purify, bleach clean, stir the life in our cousins, the trees, the grasses, the flowering plants. Suna sets swiftly, and Dog has his end, and Dog has his beginning. In the blackness of nothing, the void of nothing, the gaping void. And it was dark, and from nothing all is born. And it was dark, and it was light one day. The day begins at sunset.
Thank you so much, Kari.
My pleasure, really, my pleasure.
So, that is a beautiful poem to start with because I'll set the stage. As we are recording this, the sun is going down. It's actually sunset as we're recording this. And when we, talked about originally doing this interview, you recommended that I read the book starting with the titular poem, The Day Begins at Sunset, and then going back to the beginning and reading all the way through. And I don't think that you necessarily meant for me to read it all in one sitting, but that is what I did. Because I couldn't stop myself.
Excellent.
Yes, and it was so beautiful to have read The Day Begins at Sunset first, then go back to the beginning, and then all of that context flows into the poem, and then you read it one more time. So I highly recommend it. So I've already introduced you and the book a little bit, but just for the sake of our, reader or our listeners who are coming along with us. So I've given you a short introduction, but for listeners who are not familiar, what is this book, and also what is the Primstav? Because those are they're intertwined.
That's right. Yeah. So the Primstav is an old calendar that has two sides, a winter side and a summer side. And it is the calendar that intersects the pre-Christian agricultural traditions with the saint days that were newly imposed upon Scandinavian people by the Christian Church, by the Catholic Church, in its very beginning of days. And so what it does is it really describes both the saint days and the agricultural days, and gives us an understanding of what that transitional period was between the paganisms and this new Christianity. And I began to study the Primstav with my friend Sara Axtell in 2019. I had been asked to study it by a former professor at Luther College, Kathleen Stoker, who said, "You really should be studying the Primstav, Kari. It's just this exact thing that you're talking about." Because I've been, as I say, peeking under the lefse of what is from my Lutheran Norwegian heritage and what goes deeper. But the intersectionality of that paganism and that Catholicism is something that for me was a lot easier to just sort of leap over until Sara and I said, we really have to stop ignoring this study. And so the book starts out, yeah, I know. So the book starts out in April 2019 just as Sarah and I are plunging into this study, and the Facebook group that she is still managing, and the monthly meetup for Primstav study is still going on, which is fantastic. And I decided I wanted to explore the Primstav through poetry, and so that was my main. It was to be my study tool for this study that I've been dragging my feet against studying. Yeah.
Yeah. That's really interesting. I actually didn't know that part of it. And I think that I am also a person who learns through writing, or who processes through writing or through projects or stuff like that. And sometimes it doesn't reach the light of day, right? Sometimes it's just, I just want to process
And
this.
sometimes it should never reach the light of day. I know, right?
Right. Yes,
Yep.
absolutely. Sometimes it is just for me, and that is okay. That is my process, and
Right.
that's what it is. So it's really interesting that, this was really like, it's a beautifully embodied practice of writing these poems and reading these poems. And I think that, especially with something like, oh, I'm going to study the old calendars, it's so easy to go like, well, now I need to research Saint Ursula and all of the, different places that Saint Ursula was, and all of what does Ursula mean in this language or this language. It's so easy to get so academic, but poetry thrives in the body. It thrives in the space that is not academic.
That's a really good point. And the book itself really came about because of my Patreon patrons. I'm like, hey. I mean, I started it before I had a Patreon account, and I was told that I ought to get one by a very smart lady, Pam Ross. She's like, you really should have one of these. My son said it's really important. I'm like, yeah. So I wound up doing the Patreon thing in the fall, and then of 2019, and I had some of these poems written from the spring, and then and I started to launch this Patreon, and I'm like, hey, I think here's what I can offer. Maybe I'll bring my patrons on the poetic journey with me in this study. And so it really moved the poems from process to honing them so that other people could understand them. And it was because of those patrons. They were waiting for these poems, and it's because of them that I really sat down and honed these poems into what we have today. Yeah.
Oh, that's really cool. So as a long-term member of your Patreon,
Yay!
you mark the time in multiple ways on your Patreon. So there's the Primstav poetry, but you also pull runes for every new moon and full moon. And you also reference the runes, of course, throughout the Primstav poetry. So I'm just curious, how does your deep work with the runes um, choose your Futhark, dealer's Futhark choice, um, kind of dovetail with this? And then also, the Primstav is a lunisolar calendar. So, um, thinking about it from that perspective as well, like, just let's talk about
Yeah.
that and how you're marking time in all these different ways.
Right. And I think for your listeners too, I described I didn't really say what the Primstav itself was really. And it is, like I say, it's a stick with two sides. There's 187 day marks on one side and 183, I think, on the other, to make 365 days out of the year. And so each of these saint days is each of the days of the Gregorian calendar that we go by now it being, was it October 10th on the Gregorian calendar, it gives us a way of tracking the 365 days. But the moon, of course, never lands on the same day throughout the calendar. Every year, in cycles, it'll land on that day again. So, marking time in a solar way with 365 days as a Gregorian way with the solar quarters and with the moon winding itself through, like it talks Monty meanders and Sina shines, are different ways of marking time. And it was so essential when the pandemic hit in March of 2020, when our government in Minnesota said you can't go anywhere now. It was so important for me to look at that Primstav calendar as a different way of marking time, because time was just so out of whack for everybody. There was no 5-day work week. There was no church on Sunday. There was no sort of way for a lot of people to figure out what day it was, and people were really having a hard time. And the Primstav really kind of became a rudder for me during that. And then the new moons and full moons have always been a really important rudder for me in my body for time. Back when I was in high school, and I had an amazing education, really, as a public school student. It was at a high school. I had a teacher that said, Kari, you're failing this class because you keep going out for coffee instead of coming to class. So why don't you do this? I know, right? So why don't you do this independent study project and make up your grade? And I'm like, okay, well, what do you got for me? He's like, I would like you to do a study and a paper on the difference between the Gregorian 12 moon calendar and the actual lunar solar cycle, the lunar cycle. And I was like, well, I don't even know what that is, So
what class was that for?
I mean, it was an English class, and it was my teacher, Tom Teetsy. I think everybody who ever had him said he changed my life. He was a really brilliant man. It was for an English class, and so I took that January and I studied, over Christmas, and I studied, did all these studies and found out, hey, guess what? A huge chunk of the world has a lunar New Year, and figured out, oh wow, and then as I'm tracking the moons, I understood how it started to affect my own menses, my own moon times, and affecting my body and affecting how I understood the world. And it, as I say, it kind of ruined me for a day job.
Yes.
I'm like, oh no, that won't be good, because I'll need a good week to be in my moon time and do these things.
Yeah, that's it's funny, like I don't know, just having a day job now, and like the lunar cycles, like I miss it, I miss being able to set some stuff aside, because my body feels cranky at this time in the lunar cycle or whatever it is.
Yeah.
And some of that is lost now. So much of that is lost now.
Well, so much of it is lost. I mean, and we as modern people are so far removed from our bodies for the most part, because that is what this overculture demands of us, is that we set aside all of our, normal sleep and food and cycles of anything, and do this sort of rigid, conform to a rigid schedule. So it is tricky. But so I started doing these new moon and full moon rune pulls as part of the offering to my patrons on Patreon, so that I would have something consistently to offer. And then if I could offer a poem or something else or whatever, it was extra good. But it really helped me be grounded and centered and consistent over these last, from the fall of 2019 to just this last full moon, to be able to do that, and then pulling runes for it. So I go between the elder Futhark and the younger Futhark. And during the pandemic, it was really the younger Futhark that came up to help me alongside the Primstav, in order to help me continue to understand and embody what was happening. Not just the pandemic, but we both live really close to George Floyd Square, where George Floyd was murdered, and the uprisings for justice that occurred consistently from that point until the conviction of the murderer, Derek Chauvin, the murderer. So it shifted everything. Those years shifted everything for all of us, and for me, the Primstav poetry and the younger Futhark combined to just really bolster me and support me and give me some anchors for the last 3 years.
Yeah, and that's a really good kind of flow into my next question, which has to do with, so the project started before the pandemic.
Yeah.
And then there is a shift in the poems that is pretty, it can feel gradual, and perhaps that's because it feels as you're going through the poems as though you're going through the year, but the poems are from different years, right? So it's not sudden. It's not sudden that suddenly we're talking about the pandemic and George Floyd Square and all of these things that are really important. But I think that the way that you related the poetry to what was happening around you was both essential for the process, but also kind of an invitation into, yes, I'm studying this old calendar, but it has meaning now.
Absolutely. Yeah.
So in terms of the poetry itself, we've talked a little bit about how your relationship with time was going throughout this, but in terms of the poetry itself, what do you feel like, and your study of the Primstav calendar, not just the poetry, they're so intertwined you can't disconnect them.
Right.
But how did that change over the course of the 3 years that you were composing this collection?
Right. Well, it felt that the poems were kind of moving along just fine until the poem that I sometimes like to read in the middle. It's kind of in the middle of the book, where suddenly the calendar. So I was creating the calendar stick as I was writing the poem. So on a paper template, and marking the little saint days. And then after the George Floyd murder, everything shifted, because I just couldn't get myself to even put any day marks on the summer side after that. And I guess I could read that poem called Fairwake 2020. It's a long and rather intense poem in 3 parts, but I would love to read that. Okay, Bear Wake 2020. A new wake. It's a long stretch from Bear Wake to Bolthoff Day on the Primstav. 26 days to work the fields, cut peat, care for the cattle, a big push for our winter survival. But the things that happened in those 26 days of Gregorian 2020 caused my Primstav to go blank in a different way. Summerside changed forever for George Floyd Wake. Bear Wake. May 22nd is Bear Wake. How I love the bear, shaggy fur, honey paws, oh so waking up to summer. I was singing Otso's promise to Meiliki, the forest mistress, his creator, Kalevala lady. She would make him teeth and claws if he would promise not to do bad deeds, not resort to ugly actions. And 3 days later, the world witnessed the worst of deeds, the ugliest of actions. Neck lynching, bringing up the bile, the poison, the worm of loathsome evil. Disregard for human life, unmoved by cries of mother, snuffing out the life, hands on hips, knee to neck, waiting patiently for life to slip away, breaking every oath, committing every shame, the needing of Minneapolis police, the needing of America. Needing is man shame. Here is the man shame list of my Nordic ancestors. This renders you ärgy and in need, shame, skam, heavy schooled. This puts you in Nifhel, in a place where the worms of the world tree eat out your poison until it's gone. 1. Murder, killing someone without just cause and failing to take responsibility. Taking responsibility is schooled, chilled. This is you. The jury confirmed what we all saw. Rape or violence against the soft or blouser. Women, children, weak people, people weakened by being subdued, handcuffed, spirits broken, torture. This is you. 3. Breaking promises and oaths and pledges such as to protect and serve. This is all of you. 4. Man fleeing combat when combat is required. It makes a jarl or a thrall to hide behind another man's life to save your own. Police officers watching the knee lynching. This is you. 5. Man afraid to avenge himself or his kin or to restore honor when offended. Somehow I think this is what Chauvin thought he was doing, the son of the worm of whiteness, but instead it created an urlog that is poison to you, your kin, your ancestors, and your descendants, because boxes are ticked, so I'm going to stop there. I'm going to stop right here. You must know, I made a vow not to take a human life in this one. If I want quality of soul for my next life, I may not take another human in this life. After taking so many for centuries, a millennium, do not kill another in my name. Do not have my back with guns or knives or broken bottles. I disavow anyone killing for me, for my skin type, for my gender, for any reason. Your reasons are not reasonable for my soul. There were no Primstav marks from Bear Wake to Bolthoff Day until George Floyd Wake made a mark, causing us to remember, to fight the worms of white supremacy, of superiority, of narcissism, of shameful actions, of all the evils that rose to the surface on Gregorian May 25th.
Beautiful. Thank you so much for sharing. I think like it's one of those where time springs forward and the traumas of the past are really present, and the traumas of the present are reaching into the Orlog, right? And you talk about
Right.
that very beautifully in that poem. Um, and I think that actually one of the things that really struck me about this was how much of the poetry really is about conflict and really is about what is the Orlog, what is the pain, what is the joy, what is that that has been inherited, and also what do we need to fight for in the future. um the vow that you make in the poem not to kill another, and then you sort of reference to having killed in the past, in past
Mm-hmm.
lives, you know.
Yes. Yes.
um
My whole, my whole ability to be who I am here and now rests on the fact that, so many thousands of Native people were killed so that my grandpa could come from Norway and farm here. That there was free and open land here. Well, that is a blood debt.
mhm,
It wasn't free and it wasn't open, and so it's this, not just me personally, but for the myriad ancestors that I have that killed constantly, uh,
mhm.
you know, and how we benefit from it. So yeah, thanks for pointing that out.
Yeah, I feel that this collection feels like a potent piece of ancestor work.
Yeah.
And of course, ancestor work means a lot of different things, right? And for some people it means actively healing, um you know the Orlog. For some people it means learning more about your ancestors. For some people it means honoring the ancestors or venerating them. Some people I know even will do, um it feels weird to call them gifts. Like for example, I had a friend who did uh unbaptizing rituals for the ancestors who had been forcibly baptized,
Mm.
that kind of thing. So like
Mm.
there is the ancestor work, and then there's also just sitting with it and being with it and understanding it. um and so what are some ancestor stories and healing that you came across during this project? Of course, you don't have to
Mm.
share anything that is too personal between you and them, um but I'm curious.
Well, I think for a lot of Norwegians and Norwegian Americans, the trying to reckon Bloody Olaf and Saint Olaf is um, one of those pieces that is sort of that inherited trauma that has been amplified to be glorified, and I guess that's one of the pieces that most speaks to ancestors that I didn't know,
Mm-hmm.
but that who I could be, that I could be now. Would you want me to read that poem?
If you feel moved, it's a beautiful one, and I think it
Yeah,
also, I do want to talk about that kind of way that you are grappling with the relationship between your Christian and pagan roots throughout this collection as well. And so
yeah.
this is a good poem to talk about that.
Awesome. All right. Well, it is called 29 Juli, or July, St. Olaf's Wake. St. Olaf was unpopular while he was alive. That's putting it mildly. Not yet sainted, he was called Bloody Olaf for torturing other Norwegians into Christian conversion, with himself as high king over all. He did worse to the heathens than was done to Jesus, and did it Navan messed up, just like Saul slash Paul. Same Roman tactics, values, misogynies, in the name of Jesus ad nauseum. What is this Urlog? That we only promote conversion stories as glory stories. So, Olaf, you got sainted. Now it's all cool. Okay. Nidaros Trondheim, father's grandfather's homeland. That's where you are buried. Patron saint of Norway, patron saint of Lutherans, if we allowed ourselves to have saints, patron saint of universities at the end of the 400-year night, proving Norwegian Americans are not ignorant backwater heathens in Minnesota. Did heathens kill you in the Battle of Sickelstead, or land-owning Christian converts for profit and good relations with their Christian wives? Battle for power, enclosure politics, patriarchal, feudal, and forever detached from our true ancestral ways, still remembered in the runes like Othala and Mana. Was this an enclosure war fought by kings and chieftains? Were you the wicker man, the bloat, the king that held the luck and failed? Did heathens eat your body parts? Does sainthood help your image in heaven? I am a Volva, holding the staff for myself, my family of origin, bicontinental Lutheran, Catholic, heathen, Norwegian, American. Who is the devil? It was you who shoved our blowing horns down our throat and introduced vipers into our belly to chew a hole into us so we would denounce our ancestral ways and give over our ancestral land. Yeah, that's kind of intense.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it's not a light collection. And there are
No,
there
it
are
isn't.
truly really beautiful things in this collection as well. I think that, you talk about some of the Primstav days you spent in Finland, and
Right.
some of um the avalanche story, which I won't ask you to read because it's
Yeah.
longer and it's a little bit more
It,
prose, but it's beautiful.
Thank you. Yeah, that was a story I grew up with. My mom's mother's mother's nephew, Olaf, and he had been taken by an avalanche, and I read it actually in Norway this past spring, and I think in the end of the story, I say his body was never found, and I had a one of my relatives goes, I'm not sure if maybe he wasn't found. I'll find out for you. And I'm like, okay, well, the poem is as it is. So,
Yes.
yeah. But yeah, this wrangling that we have to do with ourselves, um, especially as Americans, where we're really uncovering this root cultural identity that we need desperately to uncover for ourselves. It's in this book. The poems in Finland were pretty light, and yet substantive, but I had a lot more joyfulness to them. And then after the pandemic, the poems got very dark. Um, but there are a few, there are light pieces. So The Day Begins at Sunset is the last poem in the collection, and its title, and it really holds hope, I think, that just as for our ancestors, the sun will rise and set, and we will see it as they saw it.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think that there's something here too. One of the things that, and another like motif that you repeat throughout is, Norwegian American identity, but also Lutheran heathen identity. That
Right.
you are not one necessarily without the other in this collection. And I know that that is something that a lot of listeners probably have either had to grapple with, or I have some listeners who I know deal with religious trauma from having been raised in the evangelical church, um
Right.
and or like my father has Catholic trauma,
Mm-hmm.
ex-Catholic trauma, which is a very different flavor than the evangelical. Um, but religion is hard. And I also know people who have, of course, pagan, religious issues as well. Um, so how does that, how did the exploration of the saint days in particular,
Mm.
identifying them as saints, it's a fact, like they're canonized, um
Right.
but then also a lot of them have very grisly ends, and a lot of them have
Well,
very disturbing stories. How did all of that kind of rattle around? Like for me, I think of
well,
it as like it's rattling around in my brain when I'm thinking about the saints. They're just kind of up there.
I mean, that's why I was like, no, I don't think I need to do this piece. In the first place, is that a lot of these saints' stories are horrific, and some of them are beautiful and everything. And I guess the thing about like this heathen Lutheran dichotomy um, is 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 something that I could hold um, more easily than that we were Catholics once.
Mm,
you know,
mm-hmm.
that's the intersection of that conversion. Once once you're Lutheran, once you're Lutherans, and you are like, well, as Luther said, we all should be able to read the Bible for ourselves and make our own determination. And I had, on my dad's side, I have Mayflower ancestors who came here specifically because they didn't want either a pope or a king to tell them what they should believe. And so I have this piece in me of Protestantism that doesn't really necessarily conflict with heathenry, because it's like, well, I can tell you that my Lutheranism is is different and also compatible with heathenry. But then when I got into this Primstav study, and I had to cope with those conversion stories and with that moment when somebody went from a bloody butcher to a saint. That was the stuff that I've been avoiding it all these years. But you know what? It was the time to do this work
Mm-hmm.
during this uprising, during this murder, where we have to be like, now we have got to be here now in the moment of this injustice, and in the face of this chill, this death, that I, as a as a recipient of privileges of whiteness, have, that I have to really really grapple with those pieces. So grappling with those pieces in the past as a 1300 Primstav study, and grappling with those pieces in the present as a Minneapolitan who is trying to figure out what I can say in favor or against anything in my own town.
Mm-hmm.
It came together. It came together in a way, and so that's, I think, why these poems both speak to both a very distant past and an immediate present.
Yeah. It's
Yeah.
so interesting looking back on it. So you're my teacher. So of course we've talked about this extensively, but I found the rosary during the pandemic,
Yes.
which is something I never expected to do, because I was like, well, if I have issues with corruption within Christianity, then like Catholicism, I certainly, am going to really struggle with personally, and had always and my dad also, having been raised Catholic and now very much not being Catholic for a lot of, very solid, both theological reasons as well as social and political reasons, not being Catholic. It was just kind of taken for granted that I would not engage with that aspect of my ancestry. And then a friend invited me to a rosary circle that was a part of the Way of the Rose. And then things just kind of started happening. Like, I inherited my grandmother's rosary and have been praying on that. I found a lot of comfort in it, and comfort specifically because it was a balm, I think, to a very difficult time.
Yeah.
They say, and historians think that Mary and the rosary was one of those things that made people really soothe. It's a self-soothing technique that a lot of the really hardline Catholic masses, or the brutal sainthoods, the brutality of conversion, and then you have this one prayer that you just repeat, and you don't even necessarily know the words, because you're maybe repeating it in Latin, or you're maybe whispering something else into your beads while you're praying, and it's socially acceptable to pray in the pews, but you don't have to be praying to that God. And it was a really it was a very deeply unexpected spiritual practice that I never anticipated coming forward, but it was ancestral healing for me. It was healing in a lot of ways. And it's that point where, and this is how it also relates back into Primstav work, is that it is that point of, well, we weren't heathen that long ago, and we're moving into that, that point of forced conversion and all of that stuff, and it's a ritual that has just a lot baked into it.
I think of it. Yeah, I think of the Stav churches all around Norway, and I think of those as rosaries in a way. Like the builders, this is another example of those transitional times coming together, where we're building a Christian church, and we're going to use all this pagan symbolism, and we're going to dovetail these things as process towards this new world that we're coming into. So I think that's, I think it's similar, and that's what these poems were for me, and that's what the younger Futhart runes were for me too. Like a rosary, like a daily diligence that I could do, where I could stay grounded and centered and connected to a root of my own traditional ways, with you, with the rosary, connecting you directly to many ancestors before you. There were times when our ancestors, all they had was the rosary, or all they had was the Lord's Prayer, or all they had was this one thing that really kept them going so that we could exist. And I think that that's important to also recognize, which is something that I hope that I did in this book, is kind of recognizing that we need all our ancestors, our Christian ancestors, our Lutheran ancestors, and our Catholic ancestors, and our heathen ancestors. We need all of them, in our lives.
I think that there's something very much to be said for, like, for some people, it is a, you know, I do need to personally disengage for, like I said, religious trauma
Sure.
reasons.
Yeah, yeah.
Of course,
Yep,
like, and I
absolutely.
very much support that.
Yes.
However, I also think it's challenging and important to um embrace those aspects of our ancestry that, you know, do challenge us, like in our contemporary
Yeah.
morals, you know? Like,
Mm.
um as two white people talking, right? You know, like we have to
Right.
challenge whiteness, and we have to part of the reason that we try to find our root culture is so that we stop stealing other people's cultures. Um
Exactly.
and also it's important to understand power and what that means and how we can utilize power for good, you know, how we can actively work against racism,
Yes.
you know, as
Yes,
even
yes.
as we are benefiting from it, obviously, you know, like you can't,
Hmm.
I think
Absolutely.
until you really can see it,
Mm.
you can't like undo those parts of yourself. And I think for me, like
Mm.
that has meant, you know, well, we're talking about the Primstav, we're talking about religion and the Norwegian, Lutheran, American, heathen, etc. You know, these big labels is
Yeah.
understanding what those mean within you. Um,
Yeah, yeah,
and being able
yeah.
to, you know, look at them really clearly.
Hmm. And
Um,
to continue to unpack them because they are a constant source of reflection.
yes.
You never like, okay, I get it now and move on, you know?
Yeah.
So,
I think that the Primstav has
yeah.
been particularly interesting. Um, also just because of all this whole world of, you know, magic and almost like re-enchantment in a weird way, that
Mm.
come because so much folklore and so much magic and so much was preserved in the Primstav, um
Yeah.
and without understanding that wider context of um you know, uh who these saints were, or you know, who um Santa Lucia is a really good example, actually.
Mm.
So who Saint Lucy is in Sweden is very different from
Mm.
who Santa Lucia is in Italy, but culturally speaking, but still the same saint technically.
Yes, and back on the Primstav Julian calendar, that was December 13th was winter solstice.
Mm-hmm.
So that Santa Lucia was put on winter solstice back then is yet another. It's not just sort of a random December 13th thing. It used to be winter solstice that
Mm-hmm.
she was honored. So yeah, it is really, and I guess that's that whole thing of studying time and what do we what do we honor and how do we count time, and yeah, it's a particularly interesting thing on a Primstav for a Primstav study. Yeah.
So I'm gonna start winding down our conversation.
Yeah.
I will, of course, share links in the show notes to your Patreon, and the Primstav Facebook group. And I did actually have, I should have mentioned this at the beginning. I'll make sure to put it in the intro. Note for editing Siri, put this in the intro. Um, I did have Sara Axtell on the podcast to talk about the Primstav as well. So I'll link back to
Oh,
that
nice.
episode so that people can listen to my
Oh,
conversation with her
fantastic.
as well. Um, but is there anything else that you want to share, or, you know, just let people know about?
Yeah, well, I think in just to put a link to on October 29th, that Sunday of Sunday afternoon of the Samhain weekend, I will be doing at the Bryant Lake Bowl Theater a poetry reading, and would love to have people come out for that. It's going to be hosted by Lynette Rainey Grandel, who is a Finnish poet that I have been very blessed to have done lots of different things with. And I'm going to have another Finnish poet, one of my favorite Finnish poets, Lauren Ellis, is going to also read a couple of his newest pieces. And that is on October 29th at the Bryant Lake Bowl Theater. So I'll put the link here for you. And then stay tuned for the upcoming rune book release, this new rune book coming out, because it dovetails with this book. I think between this poetry book and this new rune book that is coming out, I feel like it's the best work that I have ever done, and I'm really excited. I'm really excited for both of these things.
Beautiful.
So, thank you. Thank you so much for having me. It was wonderful to talk with you about it, and wonderful to hear your take on some of these things. I haven't really actually had talked to too many people about the poetry, and so it was wonderful to hear your responses to it. And thank you so much.
It's definitely going to be one that I return to. And you mentioned throughout the book creating your own Primstav, because you were at the time, and adding, your own dates to it and all of those things. And I am working on my own Primstav as well, my personal Primstav.
Isn't that lovely? Yes.
So very much, looking forward to that and talking with you more about it. All right. I will make sure to put all of those links in the show notes. And thank you. Thank you so much for your generosity and your time.
Well, thanks for having me again. It's a pleasure.
Thank you so much for listening to the Heathen's Journey podcast. I'm so honored to share these practices, conversations, and thoughts with you. If you would like to support this podcast directly, please consider supporting it on Patreon. I share episodes without the ads, and I also share announcements of upcoming work. I have only one tier at $3 a month, but you can give whatever works best for you. If you would like more of my writing on Nordic folk magic, consider subscribing to my newsletter Trollbrev. The name means magic letters, and it is a space for me to share some of my weirder and developing thoughts on magic. Links for both Patreon and the newsletter are in the show notes. Thank you so much for listening, and remember, keep it weird.